All right, let's jump into this deep dive. The Book of James. It's like a guidebook, isn't it, for putting your faith into action? And full of practical advice, too. We'll be focusing on chapters 1 through 5.
It's interesting. James doesn't just tell you what to believe.
Yeah.
He really pushes you to live it out,
Yeah.
to put your faith to the test.
In the real world, right. Okay, so chapter 1. He starts off by saying, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." Pure joy. When you're in those tough times, doesn't that feel kind of counterintuitive?
It does, at first glance anyway. But James is pointing to something deeper here. He's saying these trials, those challenges we face, they're actually chances to grow.
Oh.
They refine our faith, like gold being purified.
So it's not about liking the trials themselves, it's recognizing how they shape us.
Exactly. Think about it. When you go through something difficult, you often come out stronger. You learn resilience. You learn to rely on God. Your faith gets stronger. That's the kind of change James is talking about.
That makes sense. But isn't there a line between, finding meaning in trials and just telling ourselves to be happy when things are rough? What about those times when it just feels overwhelming, like you're drowning?
That's a great question. James isn't denying that pain or advocating for toxic positivity or whatever.
Right.
He's acknowledging those difficulties are part of life, but saying to look for those chances to grow within the challenge.
To change your perspective, right. But how do we actually do that when we're in the middle of it all?
Well, James points us towards wisdom. He says in James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you.
So prayer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Asking God for guidance when things are hard.
Makes sense.
But not just any prayer. A prayer of faith, a prayer without wavering. He uses this great image of being double-minded, like a wave in the sea.
Oh, I know that feeling, like second-guessing yourself all the time.
We all do sometimes. But James is saying to approach God with a sure heart, believing he will give you the wisdom you need.
To get through it. Okay, so we face trials with a focus on growth, and we seek wisdom through prayer. Good foundation. But what else does James see as really essential for living out our faith?
Well, he tackles a question that people have debated forever. Can faith alone save you?
That's a big one. And I know James doesn't shy away from it.
Not at all. He says faith without works is dead. Now, that's a statement that's easily misunderstood. It's important to really dig into what he means.
Yeah, unpack it a little. He's not saying we earn our salvation, right, like by good deeds.
No, it's not a point system with God. It's about understanding that true faith, real faith, it shows itself in action.
So our actions are a reflection of our beliefs.
You got it. James gives that example of Abraham willing to sacrifice Isaac. It wasn't the act itself that saved Abraham, but the obedience that showed his faith.
Intense example. But how does faith in action work, like in our everyday lives? I mean, we're not all being asked to make those huge sacrifices.
That's true. Think of it this way. If you believe in compassion, how does that look in how you treat others? If you believe in generosity, how do you use your money? Even small things show the truth of our faith.
Okay, aligning our actions with our beliefs. Got it. Now, there's another topic. It's something everyone can relate to, and James talks about it. Words. I mean, we've all been hurt by careless words.
Oh, yeah?
Spoken by ourselves or others.
Doesn't hold back on this one either. James has some vivid imagery to describe the tongue. A small rudder steering a huge ship. Even a tiny spark that starts a forest fire.
Right. It's powerful because it shows how something so small can have a big impact.
Right. And he's not just talking about gossiping or negativity. He goes deeper. Says the tongue shows the state of our heart.
So if your words are full of bitterness, it's a sign you need to do some inner work.
You got it. James wants us to look at how we speak, not just to avoid saying the wrong thing, but to have a heart that speaks words of life and encouragement and truth.
That's a high bar. I'll be honest, I struggle with this. There are times when, well, anger gets the better of me. My words don't reflect the love and grace I want to show.
We've all been there. But James reminds us it's a process, and it starts with the heart.
Aligning our hearts with God's will. How do we do that, though? How do we actually cultivate that kind of heart?
He gives us clues. He talks about seeking wisdom, about being slow to speak and quick to listen, about choosing words that build people up.
Self-awareness and intention. It's not just filtering what you say, it's addressing the root of the issue.
Yes, and that leads us to another important theme. Drawing near to God. Those inner battles we have, the wants and desires that fight within us.
And how that can spill out into our relationships.
Yeah, create chaos. James points out those battles are often from the wrong desires, wanting things that don't line up with God's will. He says, you desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. It's James 4.2 and 3, by the way.
Like we're always chasing things that will just leave us empty
Yeah,
and making a mess of things along the way.
but James offers a solution. Humility. He says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. He's saying when we humble ourselves, when we recognize our need for God, we open ourselves up to his grace.
So humility is the key.
Yeah, to getting closer to God, to
Yeah.
finding peace in
I-
all that inner turmoil.
Makes sense. And in James 4.8, there's that powerful call to action. Come near to God and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's an invitation, but it's also a challenge.
It is. It's both. Drawing near to God is about action, but it's also about surrender.
Turning away from sin, but admitting we need him. Now, what about prayer? James really emphasizes the power of prayer.
Oh, he does. And it's not just for certain times or feelings. He says to pray in every circumstance. Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise.
So good times and bad. Prayer should be a constant.
Yes. He uses the story of Elijah, the guy who experienced both God's power and human weakness. He prayed earnestly that it might not rain, and it rained not on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit.
Yep.
That's 1 Kings 17 and 18.
It's powerful because it shows God hears us even when our prayers seem impossible, and Elijah didn't give up.
Exactly. That persistence.
It reminds me of James 5.16. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. That's always been such a comfort.
It's a great verse. It's saying prayer isn't just something you do alone. It's about community, about supporting each other and believing in the power of prayer together. And James says that kind of prayer, effectual, fervent prayer, can heal, forgive, and even change things.
That's powerful. This deep dive has been amazing so far. We've talked about joy in trials, wisdom through prayer, faith in action, taming the tongue, drawing near to God, and now the power of prayer.
It's been great. We've only just started, though.
So much more to discover. Let's keep going. Back into James. So we've seen how important it is to put faith into action, but what else does he see as crucial for this way of life?
Well, one thing he keeps coming back to is humility. Seems like James really has a thing about pride, doesn't he?
He does. He sees it as a real roadblock in our relationship with God.
Yeah.
Earlier, we talked about that verse, God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. Definitely made me think, but what does it really look like to be humble, in everyday life? It can't just be like feeling bad about yourself, right?
Oh, for sure not. Humility's not about putting yourself down. It's more about, taking yourself less seriously.
Okay.
It's recognizing we're not the center of the universe. We depend on God for everything.
Right.
Zero bragging rights in front of him.
So less ego, more reliance on God. I get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just our attitude toward God, it's how we treat each other. James warns against gossiping and judging other believers.
Oh, yeah. In chapter 4, speak not evil one of another, brethren.
Yeah, one.
It's close to home. I mean, we've all probably been guilty of that.
At some point.
It's like our default sometimes. But why is James so against judging?
He argues that it's like putting ourselves in God's place, deciding who's worthy and who's not.
So it's a form of pride.
Exactly. It's saying, I'm better than you, or I've got it all figured out. But the truth is, we're all flawed. We all need God's grace.
Okay. Humility checklist. Less ego, more God, and a whole lot less judging. Got it. But there's another tricky area James gets into that's kind of tied to pride. Wealth.
He doesn't shy away from it. He talks about how money can be dangerous.
Yeah. Chapter 5, he has that warning for the rich. Tells them to weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Pretty intense.
Yeah, it is. But it's not about wealth being bad in itself. It's about how we handle it. That potential for greed, that exploitation, that self-indulgence that can come with money.
So it's not wrong to be rich. It's wrong to let riches rule you.
Exactly. James reminds us that true wealth isn't about money. It's about God and how we treat others.
Speaking of treating others, James talks about caring for those in need, too. Remember how he called out favoritism towards the rich?
Yeah.
And neglecting the poor?
He wants us to show our faith,
Hmm.
Put compassion into action, not just saying be warmed and filled, but actually giving people what they need.
It really makes you think about where you put your time, your energy, your money, doesn't it?
It does.
Okay, so we've got humility, using wealth responsibly, caring for the poor. Anything else James says is key to living out our faith?
One more big one, perseverance. Sticking with it when things get tough,
Right.
especially when we're facing trials, even persecution. James doesn't want us to be like fair weather followers.
Makes sense. He started this whole letter by telling us to consider it pure joy in trials. So how do we persevere when life throws those curveballs?
He uses this great image in chapter 5. He compares us to farmers waiting for their crops to grow. They don't just give up if it's slow. They trust the process. He's encouraging us to do the same. Be patient for the Lord's return.
So spiritual growth takes time,
Right.
no instant gratification.
Right. And he says not to grumble or complain when things are tough,
Okay.
especially not within the community of believers. He calls for unity, support, and to remember God is the ultimate judge.
He also talks about Job, the ultimate example of perseverance and suffering. God sees our struggles. He'll reward those who stay faithful.
Right? And James gives some practical tips. He says to be people of integrity, avoid swearing oaths, and to let your yes be yes and your no be no.
It's about building trust, building character.
Yep.
It's interesting how he connects integrity and perseverance. Like being honest and dependable in the small things prepares you for the big challenges.
It does. And of course, he comes back to prayer, turning to God in affliction.
Right.
Prayer is that lifeline, that source of strength.
This makes me think about how James calls us to a different way of life. It's not sitting back and waiting, it's being active.
Yeah. It's a faith that's lived, not just talked about.
Hmm.
And it's not always easy, but it's always worth it.
This has been great. We've covered so much. Trials, wisdom, action, words, drawing close to God, and now perseverance. What stood out to you most from James's teachings?
It's the practicality of it all.
Yeah.
He's not just giving us these big theological ideas. He's giving us actual ways to live out our faith every day.
He's talking about real problems, trials, money, controlling what we say, caring for others, and hanging in there when things get tough.
And he doesn't sugarcoat anything. He's challenging us to really look at ourselves, make changes.
No, he doesn't let us off the hook. But there's also that hope, that encouragement throughout. Like, it's hard, but you're not alone. God will help.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
He doesn't just point out the problems. He points us to God, the source of real strength.
So we've gone through humility, wealth, caring for the poor, and perseverance.
We've seen how he wants us to live with action, integrity, and dependence on God.
But James isn't done yet. He's got some final thoughts for us as we finish this deep dive.
I'm curious to hear them. James always keeps it interesting.
All right, let's move on to chapter 5 and see how he wraps up this powerful letter. All right, last part of our James deep dive. It's been intense, hasn't it?
It has. Really makes you think. But encouraging too.
Yeah, for sure. So chapter 5, what's James focusing on as he finishes up?
He comes back to some things we've already talked about.
Yeah.
Patience, humility,
Yeah.
waiting for the Lord's return, like those farmers waiting for their crops.
Right, that analogy.
Takes time, that spiritual growth. You got to have perseverance.
It's so easy to be impatient. Like, we want everything right now.
I know. And he warns against bragging about our plans too. We're not in control of tomorrow.
Yeah, good reminder.
Always got to say, if the Lord wills, he's in control.
Hmm.
And then he connects it to sin. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin.
Oh, right.
Not enough to just, have good thoughts. You got to act.
So it's not just avoiding the bad, it's actively doing good, even when it's hard.
Yeah. Living what you believe, always seeking God's guidance.
This makes sense. But there's one more topic I wanted to get to. Restoring people who've, wandered from the faith. It's something I've seen firsthand, and it's tough. What does James say about it?
He has this great image in James 5:19 and 20, redemption, restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth and one convert him, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and shall hide a multitude of sins.
It's beautiful. Like, we have this duty to gently lead each other back.
And there's urgency there too. Compassion. Like, don't just stand there, do something. Reach out, show them the way back.
It's like, we're in this together. We need each other. Even those tough conversations, walking with someone who's struggling.
And James is pointing to eternity too, saving a soul from death.
Wow. That really puts it all in perspective.
But hopeful too. Nobody's beyond redemption, all right? God's always there for those who seek him.
Okay, as we wrap up our James deep dive, what's the one thing you want people to remember?
It's simple. Faith without works is dead. Believe it, yeah, but live it out. Your actions, they got to show your faith. They got to make a difference.
James really pushes us to put our faith into practice. He talks about real life, gives real advice. He wants us to be, I don't know, living examples of God's love.
He does. Be ye doers of the word and not hearers only.
Well said. And that wraps up our deep dive into the book of James.
What a journey. Such a powerful, practical letter.
I hope everyone listening has been challenged and encouraged to, live out their faith in new ways.
Me too. Until next time, keep searching, keep growing, and keep talking about it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.